Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Here's today's moderator, Nadia Giordana.
Hello and welcome to Generations. I'm Nadia Giordana. Our guest today is Stan Greenberg, and he is a resident of Santa Rosa, Sonoma County, California. He is here to talk with us about some of the recent fires that have been happening, how they've affected him and some family members and people that he knows in the area and in the community, and also to share some thoughts and opinions with us about that subject. But first, let me introduce you to our co-hosts. Bob Johnson, welcome to the show.
Good morning, glad to be here.
It's always good to have you here. Dave Lepaco.
Hi, nice to be here. Looking forward to talking to a guest coming all the way from California.
Gloria Van Demeltraat.
I'm delighted to be here today, and I too am looking forward to speaking with our guest.
Midge Bubani.
It's great to be here and it's great to see everybody, and I welcome our guests. This is going to be an interesting show.
And our guest, Stan Greenberg. Stan, why don't you, before we get rolling, tell us a little bit about yourself so that we have more of an understanding.
Well, let's see. I grew up in Minnesota. I went to high school with Dave and Bob, and that would be Sibley High School, class of '68. Not to reveal anybody's age. And I moved to California in 1979, and I've been here for almost 41 years now. I'm a lawyer. My practice currently is a tax law practice. I teach Tai Chi Chuan. I serve on a local school board. I'm a father of 4, grandfather of 5, a husband, and that's about it. Oh, I'm a musician too. I play in a blues band, or I did before the lockdown.
He's kind of a Renaissance man.
A Renaissance man. And Stan, you're out there in California, practically a native by this time. The fires have affected you and your families in some ways. Could you tell us about those fires, where they're at now, what was happening a month ago, and bring us up to date on what it's like to be there, live there, and deal with those fires?
Fires were not a problem for us until 3 years ago. We live in Santa Rosa, California. That's in Sonoma County, which is about an hour north of San Francisco. And lived here until 2017, when there were fires. A couple of times I encountered fires in the mountains when I take my kids camping. We drive by fires. I remember once stopping in Bridgeport, California, en route to the Eastern Sierra, and there were a bunch of firefighters in the cafe where we stopped to eat. But fires used to be elsewhere. In 2014, I think it was, might have been 2015, there was a big fire in Lake County, which is an adjacent county. It's northeast of Sonoma County where we live. But it didn't come into Sonoma County. In 2017, a fire started in Napa County, which is east. It's also adjacent to Sonoma County, east of us. It started on October 8th. In the evening, my wife and I went to bed smelling smoke. we wondered, why are we smelling smoke? It was a warm evening. It didn't seem like anybody would be up burning wood in their fireplace to heat up. But we kind of dismissed it and went to bed. At 5 in the morning, my neighbor knocked on my door, waking us up, thankfully. A fire was coming into Santa Rosa. Now, I should say that the fire traveled, I don't remember the exact distances, but it was something like 12 miles from Napa County over a mountain range down into the northeastern part of Santa Rosa. Same path that a fire had taken in 1964, called the Hanley Fire. But apparently everybody had forgotten about that because there were no warning systems in place in 2017 in Sonoma County for fires. So the people, people relied on their neighbors, on police officers, running down the streets, driving down the streets with their sirens on, knocking on doors. The fire stopped about a mile north of us. So we were awakened early that morning and we started together to prepare to evacuate. It turns out we did not have to evacuate that time, but we were on edge for several days. That was a fire that destroyed 5,000 homes in Santa Rosa, 1/5 of our housing stock. Pardon me, I think it was 5%. 5% of our housing stock, but that's a lot. And a lot of folks who lost their homes then are just now getting them rebuilt. That was 2017. 2018, my son and I were returning from a camping trip in Mendocino County, and we saw this smoke plume that is visible in the background. This was from what I think became known as the Ranch Fire. These fires are named after a road, some geographic a point where they started. So the Ranch Fire was probably started along Ranch Road somewhere. So there's a plume, you can see it coming up. These smoke plumes from the big fires tend to look like mushroom clouds. I mean, not exactly the same shape, but they are of the same color, or the color I would imagine a mushroom cloud would be. So that was 2018. Last year, the Kincaid Fire caused us to evacuate. It stopped. It was started by our local power company is PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. Pacific Gas and Electric equipment has started most of the fires in Northern California. It's equipment conking out, throwing sparks during dry, hot, high wind events. And there's been a lot of criticism of PG&E about that.
Stan, this is Gloria. Do you mind telling us what has happened with PG&E and how they have handled that? My understanding too was that they had started many of those fires, including there was a question about the Paradise Fire, but that, whether it was a campfire or PG&E, I don't know. But tell us what they have done, if you would, or have they have done anything about that?
Besides filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy? Well, they say that they are beefing up their vegetation suppression efforts. I've heard stories. I heard a story of somebody who knows about delivery of power, who came from Japan, I think it was, and was looking around Sonoma County and seeing all these power lines strung on power poles rather than buried underneath the ground. PG&E is a profit-making company, and they, I would say, have valued dividends to shareholders over customer safety. So in the wake of these fires, where they've incurred a lot of liability, and most of these fires have been pinned on PG&E equipment, I think including the campfire that destroyed Paradise. So they've bought new more helicopters. They're flying over the lines and monitoring the lines more, supposedly. Vegetation management. Last year, they instituted what they called PSPS, Planned Safety Power Shutoffs, where in an ideal situation, they tell you in advance that they're going to turn off your power. Why are they turning off your power? Well, because their equipment is faulty, and if they don't turn off the power, their equipment will probably start a fire. Well, we were in the midst of a PSPS, power shutoff, last year when the Kincaid Fire started in Sonoma County. Up in the mountains, near the geysers. And a piece of equipment, I mean, we knew like the next day in the newspaper, so PG&E reported that a piece of equipment went offline at such and such a time, which was like within 20 minutes of when the fire started. And that fire burned down the mountainside. This is north of Santa Rosa, came to the east of a couple of heavily populated towns, Healdsburg, Windsor. They were able to stop the fire. Our first responders, our firefighters, were able to hold the fire outside of Windsor. But in preparing for all of that and fearing that the fire might burn west, much of the county was evacuated, even all the way out to the coast. And we're about 20 miles from the coast. They were afraid that so many yes?
I was just going to interrupt here. I thought Dave Lepaco had a question.
Oh, I really didn't at this point, so you can finish up, Stan.
Oh, I got one. Where do people go when you gotta evacuate 100,000 people or something?
The city, the city and the county will establish evacuation centers, which tend to be community centers, fairgrounds. We've got a park near us called A Place to Play. Just this year, with the evacuations last week, people were encouraged to go to A Place to Play. We're on the west side of Santa Rosa. The current fires happened on the east side of Santa Rosa. So the folks who evacuated from the east side were encouraged to come to the west side. We went to my son's house, who was living with his, let's see, at that time they were just married, his wife, Luma, which is about 20 miles south of us. So we were lucky to have somebody we could go to. This year, much more difficult. COVID, you can't fit as many people in an evacuation center and socially distance this year as you could last year. So it's tough. People I know who evacuated this year wound up in various places. Some of them just got motels. Yeah, I mean, and if we had to evacuate this year, I'm not sure what we would do, because we're leery of hotels, motels in the midst of COVID.
Did you have
our son now lives a couple of blocks away from us, so we can't go to his anymore.
And I suppose a lot of older people or disabled people can't get around that easy either.
That's right. And one of the horror stories from 2017 was of the assisted living, nursing home, skilled nursing facilities that had to evacuate, and the negligence, especially I think in 2 facilities owned by the same person, where the staff kind of abandoned the residents. And it was up to family members and police and firefighters to get the residents out.
That's
It's horrible.
Wow.
It is
I mean,
terrible.
And
Yeah, it's a real problem.
I have a
Where do you
question.
go and what do you do? Hospitals had to be evacuated.
Yeah.
I have a question that's
Yeah.
a little not related to what you're talking about, but it certainly would affect your county. Napa and Sonoma are wine country. And I was wondering how the fires have affected the vineyards, which I'm sure is a big economic impact for Sonoma and Napa. How are the fires impacting that industry?
I don't know too much about that. I've read this year they're worried about, smoke damage to the crops. Some vineyards have been burnt. Some wineries have been burnt. I'm a little unique. I live in wine country, but I really don't drink wine, so I don't tune into all of that.
Okay.
But yes, it's a big industry here.
Yeah, the economy would be affected. I mean, it's just one of the aspects of
Absolutely.
the
I
fire
think I read that
reach.
8 or 9 wineries were basically torched to the ground as a result of the latest fires, but I could be wrong. Now, Stan, you were relatively unscathed, all things considered. What about people in Santa Rosa you know? You have any horror stories of individuals who you have a personal connection with and what happened to them?
Yeah. I mentioned I play in a blues band. Our former drummer lost his home in the 2017 fires. He and his wife were awakened by their fire alarm, their smoke alarm going off. I mentioned in 2017, there were no warning systems in place. I mean, there was Nixle. I don't know if you guys know about Nixle, but it's a warning system used by public agencies. That existed then, but nobody knew about it. And the sirens, I remember growing up in Minnesota, every day at 12 noon, the local siren would sound to test. We don't have sirens here. No sirens. So my drummer and his wife were awakened with flames already on the block, enough to generate enough smoke to send their smoke alarm going. And they just barely escaped. They lost their home. They now live in Hawaii. They chose not to rebuild and chose to move out. A past president of my synagogue, a woman who was not very mobile and lived by herself in a subdivision called Coffee Park, died in the fire. She wasn't able to get out.
I've got a question about the smoke. I understand you have a picture of debris or something on a car. I think I remember seeing when I saw your information.
Yeah.
The smoke damage to people breathing this has to be terrible. What precautions or what has happened with them taking care of these people that have been breathing the smoke? I know my son lives in Oregon, and he said you could hardly drive on the highways because you can't see. It's like driving through not just thick fog, but through a fabric. You just could not see on the highways at all. So what's happening with all this smoke?
Well, here's a couple of photos I took in August. Let's see. And these will be on the screen, I guess.
Yeah, we will do that.
But this was taken about 9:30 in the morning, looking just across the street from where I live. And the sky is, it's like dusk. You can kind of see a light shining from a house across the street. Ordinarily at 9:30 in the morning, there's enough light outside where you would not notice a light on inside a house. But not this morning. This would have been probably August 17th or 18th. Might be able to make out the sun here.
Barely.
This was taken in the middle of the afternoon. There's just
barely.
a small disc. Yeah,
Are you getting a lot of
And-
ash? You know, like
yes.
I lived in Orange County in the early 70s, and I remember I was teaching out there, and I remember coming out of school, and there was a fire nearby, and walking out to school, and the ash was like falling like snow, and there was ash covering all the cars and everything. Are you experiencing this now? That,
Yes.
Yes.
yeah.
This photo I took last week. This is fallout from the glass fire, which is still burning.
Mm.
It was the heaviest ash I've seen so far. You can see, you know, pieces like charred pine needles and tree leaves. That I hadn't seen before. Before, it's just been kind of this white stuff.
Is there
It's
any,
very toxic.
is there any kind of solution to any of this?
Any solution would be long-term. Yeah, I mean, implement policies that fight global warming, change forestry practices. And I'm not talking about raking the forest floor. I'm talking about controlled burns to clear out fuel. I read today that logging is not a solution. Logging actually makes forests that have been logged actually burn hotter and faster. So logging is not a solution. Changing the ownership of our power company, that might be something. You know, where people are put ahead of profits and money is funneled into fire prevention and equipment maintenance
And
and
siren.
warning systems.
What
Yes,
about,
siren. Yes, there are people locked in for sirens.
Stan, what about zoning laws? Have they been keeping up? Have they been understanding of realizing the effect of these fires that are happening, which are a natural thing in many cases, but in some, of course, there is arson or, like you say, failed equipment. How are cities and counties dealing with that as far as zoning laws or people building responsibly? Or are they building in areas that are likely to burn? I guess that's what I'm asking. What do you know or think about that?
Well, personally, I think zoning laws ought to take into account the likelihood of fire, and that people probably should not be permitted to build where fire is likely. That hasn't been happening, at least locally. People who were burned out in 2017, a lot of them are building right where they were burned out from. And I'm not aware of any change in our local zoning laws that would prohibit that. They're being permitted to do that. It's already burned once. It can burn again. It's actually already burned twice because there was this fire in 1964 that took the same path. People didn't live there, you know, in the interface, the urban wildland interface, as they call it, in those days. But plenty of them do now, and as far as I know, they're being permitted to continue building there. Well, this is kind of a dramatic, though fuzzy photo taken about 10 days ago by a neighbor from his rooftop showing the start. Well, it wasn't the start at that point. The fire was a few hours old, but this is the glass fire. He's looking eastward to the glass fire in East Santa Rosa. Pretty scary photo. And from last year, I have this photo here. This was taken from where we evacuated in Petaluma. I'm looking north. My grandson Robert is in the foreground there. But in the background is a plume of smoke stretching along the Russian River Valley. The Russian River is our local river. This was from the Kincaid Fire. We were evacuated for about, I think, 4 full days. This was during a planned power shutoff, which lasted for 5 days. We got back to the house, the power was still shut off. And you can see that plume of smoke just drifting along the Russian River. It stayed there
Yeah,
for
that's
days.
really something. Stan, thank you for being on the show today. This is a much bigger subject than our half-hour program is, but you've certainly given us a lot of information and an awful lot to be thinking about. Midge, thanks for being a co-host today, and Gloria, you too. Dave Lapaco, thanks for being on the show. And Bob, Robert Johnston.
Yeah.
And again, Stan, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Stan.
Thanks for having me.
Stay well.
You
Stay
too.
safe.
You too.
And
Maybe
thanks
all
to
stay
everyone
safe.
who's watching today. We'll see you next time on Generations.
It's
Yeah.
scary. It's really scary, and it's really
Well,
Oh,
and
stressful. And I'm
Fire
not sure
is,
how many more years.
I think fire is one of those catastrophes that is most frightening to me because, I mean, watching the videos of people kind of being trapped with fire all around them and stuff, I
yes.
can't imagine how
well,
trying that.
and the solutions are gonna take they're gonna be long-term. There's no quick, easy fix for all this. Like,
Well, and if people would take it seriously, maybe they would do something.